What is it when your new mom or dad has a sore throat? They're your strep parent. So I know you. We were in high school together. We took broadcasting at HB Beale. That was a lot of fun.
Lifetime ago.
A
Yeah,
lifetime
lifetime
ago,
ago.
yeah, for sure. And we recently reconnected, and you are a corporate trainer and clinical liaison for Canadian Surrogacy and Fertility Consulting.
Yes.
You also have a number of different hats. You're also a counselor for blended family and step parent support, as well as a columnist focusing on blended families. How do you have the time to do all of that?
Well, I'll be honest with you, the counseling is something that I don't do as much as I used to. It was something that I did a lot more a few years ago. Over the last few years, I just did an online class in counseling. So I'm not nearly as certified as some of the other counselors on my staff. Once I had kind of worked with the people who found me through the online support group, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, I kind of started transitioning to people who, like those people to counselors that I had hired who had some more credentials than I did. And as our family kind of came out of the family court system, I found I didn't want to stay wrapped up in that all the time. So I've kind of transitioned out to some other people, and I kind of just do the social media aspect of that these days. And the columnist thing is something I just do when I feel like I have something to contribute. I used to do it a lot more regularly, but again, those are things that I kind of do now as something in particular strikes me as like that I need to write about, or a particular client that I think I want to work with, but my hands are definitely less in that pot than they used to be.
So surrogacy and fertility, what would you say are some of the hang-ups about surrogacy? And on the flip side, what are some of the benefits of it that people might not expect?
So when it's non-surrogates, when it's other people, kind of like third party people who aren't involved in it, I think the hangups come from being misinformed. They make assumptions about surrogacy that are inaccurate. I find for the most part is usually where the hangups come from. And once they've been clarified with those people, like usually they have a different understanding about the process. That's not always true. There are definitely people who have their issues with surrogacy, but it tends to come down to things like they think you're carrying a baby that's genetically related to you, which in gestational surrogacy isn't true. They definitely have opinions around money exchange, which if you know anything about surrogacy in Canada, it's altruistic, so you aren't paid, only compensated for out-of-pocket expenses. So I find those are generally the points where people get their back up a little, and then of course run into people whose issues are not surrogacy itself, but the LGBTQ community, things like that. And then sometimes religious. Again, some of those things you can clarify, some of those things you can't. With surrogates themselves, same kind of hang up. Sometimes they wonder about their emotional reactions and stuff like that. But honestly, once a surrogate comes ready to get into it, they've done a ton of research. So I don't find they usually have a lot of hang up.
How many years have you been involved with surrogacy, and to what extent have you been involved?
So about 5 years, I started as a surrogate. So I became a surrogate before I started working in the industry. I had a pretty bumpy ride my first journey. So before I actually successfully carried, I was working in the industry. I came to it kind of ironically. My daughter was ill. I needed a flexible job. The agency that I was carrying with or through was hiring someone, admin. So it just kind of expanded from there. And my roles changed dramatically over that time. But yeah, so about 5 years in total, both as a surrogate and working in the industry.
It doesn't surprise me that people aren't financially compensated for being a surrogate. It kind of seems like it sullies it a bit. It makes sense about the expenses for sure. I would imagine in other countries, it might not be the case. People are compensated.
Yeah, so there's different models depending on where you go. The compensation is actually a hot topic in Canada. The agency that I work with is actually involved in some advocacy to decriminalize surrogacy. So being a surrogate is not illegal. It's just in regards to the compensation that there can be a criminal aspect if you're, caught paying your surrogate for their services. There are a lot of people who believe that we should be compensated only in so that it would make it easier. It's a lot of work for the surrogate to collect receipts, track mileage, like all of these things. And a lot of people believe that that's not right, and they should just be able to be outright compensated like it's done in the States. And then some people are very on board with the altruistic model. And then, there are other countries where they have a similar model to us or to the US, and then there's other countries altogether where things are a little bit shady, so to say. Like, I probably shouldn't say that, but just, we worry about the legal structure and some of the women who are involved, like how they came to be involved just because of the countries that they live in. So I think that here in Canada, we're pretty well protected, but the conversation around money is always evolving.
As with any industry, there are negative stories, or for lack of a better term, horror stories. What recourse do people seeking surrogacy have if the surrogate changes their mind and does not want to provide them with the child? Terminate it early on, or just not give it to them when it's born?
Right. So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to just start with that. But I can tell you that in gestational surrogacy, you have no legal claim to that child. The child's not genetically related to you as the surrogate. Actually, the statistics show that the intended parents would be more likely to not pick up the baby than the surrogate would be to not give the baby to the intended parents, if you look at the quote-unquote horror stories out there. And so while the surrogate may, and I want to clarify that it doesn't really happen, but while the surrogate may be able to hold on to custody of the child for a short amount of time, as soon as the courts got involved and a DNA test was done, the baby would return to the rightful parents. So they have the recourse of getting their baby back through the court system. Again, I really want to clarify that doesn't happen. In regards to traditional surrogacy, where the baby is actually genetically related to the surrogate, I can't really speak to that. The agency that I work in doesn't participate in traditional surrogacy. I would imagine, there are legal contracts, but I can't really give you a straight answer. You'd have to talk to a surrogacy lawyer to get some more information about that.
Oh, for sure. It's interesting that you had mentioned not genetically connected. Gestational surrogacy is, I don't want to use this word, and I apologize for using it, the carrier or the surrogate.
No, we say
Are they not
the
genetically connected to the child?
No, in gestational surrogacy, they're not. The intended parents would either use their own embryo, so either their own egg and their own sperm. If the female of the couple doesn't have the ability to produce eggs or something similar, or the same-sex male couple, they would use an egg donor. So in gestational surrogacy, there's no genetic link between the carrier, the surrogate, and the baby.
That's fascinating. So they inseminate the embryo and then place it into the surrogate.
That's correct, yeah. So the embryo grows to generally about 5 days, and then they freeze it, and then that frozen embryo is placed into the surrogate. So like I said, the agency that I work with, we don't do anything but gestational surrogacy.
How common is surrogacy, either type, in Canada?
Yeah, growing all the time. We are the largest surrogacy agency in Canada, the one that I work with. However, there are many. And I know that at any given time, we have something like 400 active surrogates. So yeah, it's becoming more and more common all the time. I think the reason for that being that we have way more access to information. People who never realized that the ability to be a surrogate was out there are now realizing that that's something that they could do. And you're seeing surrogates share their stories on social media, so exposing even more people to the idea. Not to discount egg donors, equally important, right? For women who have had medical issues or cancer treatment or uterine cancer or ovarian cancer, who can't produce eggs, they go hand in hand, right? A lot of surrogates start as egg donors and then become surrogates. Some people start as an egg donor because you can't be a surrogate until you've had a child of your own. Some people start as an egg donor and then come to surrogacy once they've completed their own families. But I definitely think it's ever rapidly expanding in Canada for sure.
Because it's probably the most serious thing that you could do is creating another person. What regulations and standards have to be met for someone to become a surrogate?
So for surrogates, it's a pretty intense process. The initial legwork when you first sign up is you go through a screening questionnaire just to ensure there are no obvious red flags in your medical history. You do a criminal records check, you do a psychiatric evaluation. And then once you pass those steps and you kind of get coordinated with a couple that you're interested in caring for, you'll actually go to the fertility clinic itself, and they will run a battery of tests on you to make sure that you're physically fit to carry and they don't have any concerns about you or the baby if you proceed with the pregnancy. So it's definitely a pretty thorough process.
For sure. There's a lot of things that you have to look out for just having a child in general, like gestational diabetes, history of illness or disease in the surrogate's family. One would hope that that screening process is pretty thorough.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's why a surrogate has to have had a child of their own before they can be a surrogate. So they have a proven track record, so to speak, of being able to carry with no real major issues. Because we wouldn't want a surrogacy to be someone's first pregnancy, only to discover that they have some kind of serious issue, or just have like horrid pregnancy in general. So they do have to have had a child of their own previously. So they kind of have that established medical history. And when they do your medical screening, they look very extensively at anything that might put you or the baby at risk if you were to carry. So there are lots of things that can disqualify you as a surrogate, the age to which you might be able to carry, or like all sorts of things like that. Those doctors are governed, depending on whether it's in the US or Canada, by policies, procedures, organizations, guidelines, by other governing bodies too.
Having a child in general is really nerve-wracking. As a male, I can't begin to understand what it's like for the female. And with surrogacy, I would imagine to a certain extent there's a lot of concern and fear, not just for the people that are seeking out the surrogate as far as not going to go to term or something wrong's going to happen, but also the pressure on the surrogate to successfully bring to term and deliver the child to the people that they're really trying to help.
Yeah, I can't say that there's no pressure. I definitely like to mitigate it in terms of working in the industry and being a surrogate myself. We talk a lot about things don't work out. It's not anything that you did wrong, but of course, all you want to do is help these people, and there's definitely stress related to that. And I'm sure for the intended parents too, particularly those who are international and live overseas, they're trusting this person to carry their baby and they can't even be close to them. I mean, I know my intended parents being from Australia and then my second intended parents from France, that those kinds of barriers are very tricky. In my first journey, we did have a loss at about 9 weeks, and I had a failed transfer. So those feelings of like feeling like you failed them, those are definitely things I'm familiar with. But I can tell you that as much as you have those moments where you're like struggling or finding it difficult and stressful, you know that stress isn't conducive to healthy pregnancy. So you do your best to chill yourself out. We have access to counselors regularly. We have an online support group. So there's lots of things to help you kind of get through that. We have the same things for the intended parents. They have counseling. They have access to support groups. They have staff members that are associated with them if they're using our agency that they can talk with. So, I mean, yes, of course, there are stressors, but we do what we can to kind of see those coming and help people navigate them. And then as a surrogate, I mean, every moment of stress is worth it to see them hold their baby when it comes. Yes, definitely stressful, but totally worth it.
Like I said at the beginning, another area that you focus on is blended families and step parenting. From what I understand, just by talking to you the couple of times that we've reconnected, is blended families are occurring more and more in Canada and North America. And I would imagine there is a lot of different feelings that everybody involved goes through when two families come together.
Aside from the emotions that people go through in the breakdown of a family, adding in brand new family members definitely brings in, not only new emotions for those people in the original family, but all the emotions of those new people coming in. So it's definitely a complicated thing. I think that definitely rapidly growing population. I know when we were kids, probably it was rare to have divorced parents. I did have divorced parents, but I know that it wasn't nearly as common as where my children, it's rare for their parents to be together. Sad state of affairs for the family model. But yeah, blended families are more and more common. And I myself have had an odd background in blended families where I came from a blended family. I've actually been a stepmom before. Then I was a single parent. My kids have an adopted dad. They have a stepdad. My kids have a stepmom. I am a stepmom again. So definitely lots of exposure to that world. And the more you're in it, the more you realize that there's so many people navigating it with really raw emotions, and there wasn't a lot of support out there. So it's definitely, that's kind of why I kind of tuned into that area for quite a while.
I would imagine that from the perspective of the children in a blended family, getting past the initial apprehension or nervousness or disdain for the idea of other people coming into your family, whether it be with your dad or your mom, I would imagine that having a blended family and more people added to your family as a whole provides a lot of benefit to that child. The more people that care about them and love them and are there for them in the long run is beneficial.
I 100% agree with you. I think the more people in a child's life to love them, the better off they are. Everybody's going to bring a different perspective. If we're talking about parents to a child, you know, even if they have step parents, everyone's going to bring a slightly different worldview to that, a slightly different, you know, their own history with their own parents. And, you know, the more exposure that a child gets to different types of people and different types of love languages, and, you know, the better off they are, assuming that all these people coming into their lives are positive and good and kind people. The number one thing that I learned while navigating my own marriage breakdown and my first marriage, full disclosure, I'm on my third marriage. So my first marriage, I was young, very, very young. My girls are from that first marriage. I was remarried. That marriage didn't work out. However, him and I get along very well still, and he adopted the girls. Unfortunately, our biological dad isn't around. His wife, or soon-to-be wife, is amazing. And then my husband also has a child as well. And the one thing I've kind of like come to realize navigating all of that situation, including like my first marriage, I had a stepson and who I was involved with for years, is that it's not the kids who struggle as much as we think. Sure, they struggle, of course. The breakdown of the marriage is hard on them. The changes are hard on them. If they're young, it's less hard. They don't remember it as much. But honestly, it's the grown-ups and their own egos and their own insecurities on their relationship with the child when they see their child bonding or interacting with another adult figure, particularly of the same gender as them. They struggle with their own insecurities of like, is this person trying to take my place? Is this person going to have a stronger relationship with my child than I do? They just did this with my kid. Why wouldn't they have let me do it? That's my job. So generally, the biggest, highest emotions, the biggest problems I find come from the grown-up. But the best thing you can do as a grown-up, in my opinion, is just like operate from a place where you always feel like you're doing the best you can for the kid, because you got up to 4 grown-ups involved who have their own egos and their own insecurities, and you're never going to please all of them. And at least if you can look back and say, I always acted in the best intentions of the children in my life, that's all you can hope for, really.
I myself am recently separated. About 2 years ago, I got separated, and things are happening with that as far as logistics and things taken care of. And that's one of the things that I often think about focusing on the future is if I am approached by the situation of creating or being part of a blended family, what sort of emotions am I going to feel? The insecurities that you just mentioned, I can totally understand why someone would feel like that. So as a counselor, what are some of the things that you help the people with and recommend to sort of make the transition more positive and palpable?
It's tricky. You know, everybody's got different situations, so everyone gets, you know, slightly different advice. You always have to remember, whether I'm talking to like clients or friends, they're only giving their side of the story. And as much as that might be as truthful as they can manage, there's always like other factors at play that sometimes they don't even realize are affecting their emotions. So obviously talking to someone. So obviously if they're talking to me, then they're talking to someone. But if it's like a friend or a family member, I think having a grown-up outside of your situation to talk to and navigate your situations with is really important, so that, you know, you have very clear boundaries between what you discuss with that person and kind of like what you would bring into your reactions in your own household. In regards to like blanket advice, you know, you can't control anyone else. You can only control your own reaction to them, particularly during the breakdown of the relationship or navigating your partner moving on or you moving on. The most important thing you can do is set healthy boundaries. When you are navigating a new addition of a partner to your life, having a conversation with that partner about what their boundaries look like with your children, what you guys are both on board with them doing and not doing, like having really firm agreements between the two of you before that person ever meets your child, to make sure that you can be on the same page. And then in terms of like navigating that introduction with the ex-partner, definitely I always encourage the mom and the dad do as much of the communication as possible. Sometimes later on you can bring in the step-parents if the relationship is positive, but I think the number one thing that tends to happen that blows everything up is people moving too quickly in terms of introducing kids, in terms of introducing kids without establishing clear boundaries, in terms of ex-partners talking to current partners. Sometimes that stuff happens really quick. Being really careful about what you say in front of the child, you know, even if your partner is being a terrible person to you, They're still your child's other parent, and anything negative you say about that other parent to your child is only going to make them feel bad about themselves. So that's probably like a huge one. And then controlling your reactions. If they say terrible things to you, you can't control. If they lie, you can't control, any of those things, but you can control your reaction. And you need to be able to look back at this situation and know that you acted with integrity, you acted in the best interest of your child. And it's okay to have all the emotions. You can be mad that your partner moved on and introduced your children to their boyfriend after 2 minutes. You can be mad that the stepmom took your kids out for ice cream and that's your thing with your kids. All those things are cool. You can feel whatever emotions you want to feel. What's important is what your children see coming off of you. So have those emotions with your girlfriends while you have wine. Have those emotions with your buddy while you go, work out at the gym, rant and rave at a grown-up. But just be really careful about what you present to your children because they'll remember it more than you think.
It really does affect the child, and I myself am very fortunate, and no separation comes without difficulties.
No.
But I'm very fortunate that I'm able to have a positive and respectful relationship with my ex. And that's what we decided that we wanted. Because at the end of the day, you are really affecting the child. Almost always, if there's problems between the dad and the mom, or the mom and the mom, or the dad and the dad, the kid is going to feel bad about themselves, feel like it's their fault, that all the blame is on them. It's just because they don't understand things. And it's just what you had just said. They feed off of the motion that you're sending out. The unfortunate instances of parents using the children as weapons against the other parent and threatening the other parent.
And that's where regulation of your reaction comes in, right? Stay out of the court system if they can manage it, because the court system does not bring out the best in anyone. When you get into the situation where you're navigating court, then everybody's looking to win. What can I use against this person in court? And it's not conducive to healthy parenting, repair of relationship, nothing, right? But at the same time, if you're in the type of situation where it's abusive, they are withholding your children or using them as a weapon, that's where the court system has to come into play. But even when you're navigating the court system, it's about what's being presented to your children. So if they can tell that you're fighting with the other parent, or you're talking about it in front of them or to them, which is even worse, or passing messages through them, or any of those things, even if they don't know exactly what's going on, you're right, they're going to pick up on it. And you can navigate the court system and have a not such a great relationship with your ex, but still be completely respectful and civil to them. And what I often say to my clients is, if it's bad and you can't communicate verbally, put everything in writing, but write every email as if you're writing to a coworker that you hate, but you work with every day and your boss is CC'd on the email. So just be polite, respectful, kill them with kindness, give them all the information they need, make sure you cover your ass. Sometimes you go a little extra, you extend an olive branch, or you try to repair, depending on how bad things are for the benefit of your child. But, you can only ever control your own reactions and your own responses to things. One of the things I talk about a lot when people ask me, did you ever have a really bad moment in parenting and say something you're not supposed to, or say something to your kids you shouldn't have? Of course, we all have. Forgive yourself, do better next time. If you have a moment where you lose it and you say the wrong thing, apologize to your kid, let them know that you made a mistake, correct it, do better next time. Honestly, if you can just get through it with your kids being healthy and come out the other side with everybody respecting each other, that's success, even if you have some mistakes along the way.
What I've experienced over the last year or so is that life is actually pretty terrifying. And that every adult we talked to when we were younger had no clue what they were doing.
That's
and
right.
hit it very well, as I'm finding out for myself, experiencing it. And it seems a process like integrating into a blended family is where you do have to see the positive and try to be the best person that you can be, if for anything else, like the welfare of the child, and set aside your differences for sure. You had mentioned the court system. It's no surprise that the courts system and lawyers can be quite expensive. There are less expensive options like mediation. One of the areas that I know that you are also focused on is the area of fathers' rights. A lot of people might want to think that things are equal as much as we can make it in our society.
Yeah, I certainly don't think they are equal. I think it gets better all the time, but I definitely don't think that they're equal. when I spoke to the fact that I think everyone should avoid the family court system if they can, of course, that's not always the answer. And like anytime I say things like, look for the positive, try and get along, be respectful, there are exceptions to every situation. Sometimes things are just that bad and you can't, right? I've been through the family court system with my own children. I've been through the family court system with my husband, like with his child. And the one thing I will say is even if you can completely avoid the family court system, whatever agreement you do come up with, you should have a lawyer individually review that agreement with you, sit down, go through it with you, and get a certificate of independent legal advice. Because even if you do come to an agreement amicably, it is a really important step that you have a lawyer look at your agreement independently with just you and not your ex-partner, and that they do the same, and that you guys both prove to each other that you've had a lawyer look at it. Because as much as you might be getting along right now, that doesn't mean you're going to get along in a year. So that's a really important step, even if you are completely avoiding the family court system. However, if you do enter the family court system, one of the very first steps is that both the applicant and the respondent, just meaning the person who filed for court and the person who is answering, both have to attend an information session. And recently, I made an adjustment to my first court order with my girl's biological father. Nothing crazy, just had to change some language in there. Because it had been so long, I had to attend information sessions. And I want to reiterate, I have children whose biological father is not involved. So I know that there are dads out there who wash their hands of their children, but I don't think that that is the standard. And I went into this family law information center as the mom and was completely disgusted by how biased it was against fathers. If I was a father going into that family law information session as the very first step of the court process, trying to find out my ex was holding my kids for me or something terrible like that, like what my recourses were, I'm doing what I need to make sure I can stay in my kids' lives, I would walk out of that session completely defeated. I actually wrote them an extremely long letter when I left, and that's coming out of it as the mother. So I can't even imagine how a dad would come out of that session feeling like. And then you have the whole obstacle of how expensive a lawyer is. There is some movement right now on getting paralegals. The ability to help in family court is not finalized yet. I really do hope that happens. But yeah, in my opinion, and like I said, it's getting better every day, but moms are pretty sure that they're going to get what they want in court, and most of the time they're right, which is terrible. If the mom is the kind of person who's trying to reduce the dad's access or keep the child away, it almost appears as though the moms are kind of expected and already assumed to be a good parent, whereas the dad would need to prove himself in the court system in order to get even regular access, let alone equal time. And I really hope that's something that we'll see change as we move forward. There are places in the world where 50-50 is the assumption, and I really hope to see Canada move that way one day. But in the meantime, we've got to deal with the family court system we've got. So that's why I say things like be respectful, be kind, be courteous, because anything you say can and will be used against you in a courtroom. So yeah, it's really important that you're careful about how you navigate the relationship if it is bad and you're going to wind up in the court system. It's terrible because when you wind up in the court system, like I said before, it becomes a war. Every interaction you have with each other, the other parent is looking for something they can use against you in court, or money motivated around child support. They don't want to give more overnight to the dad because then he has to pay less child support, or vice versa if the dad has custody. Really terrible things happen inside of family court, but sometimes it is your only option. And if it is, all I can say is, do your best to be the best parent you can be throughout that court system. Again, it's all about looking back one day and knowing you did everything you could to be in your child's life in a positive way, setting a good example.
At the end of the day, I think the literature and studies clearly show that it is in the best interest of the children to have their father in their life.
Mm-hmm. Both parents, if possible. If they're healthy and positive people, absolutely. There's no good reason not to have both of their parents in their life equally if everyone is a positive parent role model.
For the most part, I would hope that most cases are respectful and collegial and end in a pleasant outcome. I'm just speaking sort of anecdotally, but there are those situations where the mothers do treat the dads as just another source of income. And a lot of the times what ends up happening in North America, at least, the father is not only paying support, which he should. From my point of view, it's your children. You brought them into the world. You love them. You want to see them have everything that they need to thrive. And so it should be not only your responsibility, but really your duty to pay child support as much as you possibly can.
Assuming you don't have your children equal time.
Exactly, like 50-50. But there are those cases where dads have to move back in with their parents. It really financially breaks them. And to try and get that fixed or adjusted can be quite a difficult journey.
As much as I agree with you that there are circumstances where child support is appropriate, in Ontario, even at 50-50, there's often still child support. They have this adjusted income situation where they calculate what each parent would pay at full custody, and whoever makes more pays the difference. It's a crazy thing to me. Also, the amount of child support that dads are ordered to pay is based off of your income before taxes. It's an absolutely absurd percentage of your income. And as much as I understand children are expensive, and maybe if you're that dad who has no interest in raising your children, I definitely agree that there should be child support. I think that if you can't or do not want to have your children 50-50, then that's appropriate. But I completely agree with you. You know, I work with a lot of fathers in Ontario. They are doing everything right. They're working full time. They're trying to get as much access to their kid as possible. There's no good reason they can't have 50-50, and yet they can't get it. And because they can't get 50-50, their child support is full amounts. And perhaps when they separated, they left the mom with the house so that the kids didn't have to leave their home. So now they're in this situation where they're paying absurd amounts of money in child support and in rent and potentially spousal support, depending on the situation. And absolutely, financially, they can't survive. They can't have any type of good life. And then in the same situation, some moms are sometimes complaining, oh, my child doesn't have a room at your house. Like, I don't want him to sleep there if he can't have a room, but they're taking all of his money. So, I mean, I completely understand where you're coming from. And all I can hope is that through further advocacy and through fathers being prepared for court, like, you can navigate the court system without a lawyer. I did it. My last time through the court system, I self-represented even at trial. I mean, I've been through the system a few times. I know the ins and outs. There are resources available for you. Family Law Information Center at your local courthouse. You can get any and every form you need online. You can navigate that system yourself. If you're willing to put in the work and you don't have the money for a lawyer, it's possible. But you have to be organized. You have to be thorough. And I know sometimes if you're fighting against a parent who wants to keep you out, it's so disheartening. And I can only imagine how difficult it is to stay motivated. So my advice to those dads or potentially moms who are in those situations, find a support group, find a person who can help you stay strong and keep fighting for your kids, because they need you in their life.
Going through a separation, for some people, both mothers and fathers, can be quite a traumatic experience, especially if one of the parties didn't want it to happen. And so you can run into the instances of problems with mental health, which can make it even more difficult to advocate for yourself, because the other parent, not fully understanding the multifaceted world of mental health, might see the other parent as a threat or a danger. What sort of resources are available to those that are suffering with mental health problems, trying to advocate for themselves? Because in most cases, they're not a danger to their kids. They're just going through a rough time.
Totally. Prove that you're seeking treatment. Courts forgive mental health breakdowns. They understand. It's not as bad as it used to be. It used to be kind of like this big black mark on your record to have had to struggle with mental illness. I think that definitely, just the same as we see bias around mother-father in court, you probably will see bias with mental health issues. But I can speak from experience, like so many clients, they went 2-3 years seeing their children like 40 hours a year, and they suffered mental health breaks. They sought treatment, they got help, and they have the documentation to prove it. One of the other things, I probably said it a few times already, maybe not, but document. A situation where you're going to separate, seek the help as soon as you can. I know that's a really tricky thing. Sometimes you don't even realize you're struggling with mental health, but get the help as soon as you can and document that you're getting the help. Being on medications is okay. It means you're getting help. Get notes of clearance, so to speak, from your mental health doctors and professionals to say that you don't represent any danger to your children, that you're stable, that you can have your children overnight. Like if there's been some kind of major issue, that documentation becomes more important. explore your avenues for assistance with the family law information center and get the proof and the documentation that you're doing what you can to get yourself through it. And hopefully the biases become less so in the court system every day, and hopefully you won't come across anything like that. Even if you don't get the answer, like in court, there's the appeal system. If you're getting done wrong in court, there's always a recourse. As hard as that can be to say to people who've been doing it for years, just keep fighting for your kid. And eventually you're going to get the judge who sees that you need to be in their life.
Not only in divorce, but in mental health, the one thing that I think people would need to keep in mind is it's not going to be this way forever. The situation with the separation and blended families are going to change over time, but the problem with human beings is they tend to tilt towards the negative, and it's really like a fight or flight response, but it does get better for sure.
It sounds cliche to say, and it's so hokey, but practicing gratitude, the things in your life that are good. And like you said, reminding yourself it's not going to be like this forever. Those are so important to keep you grounded and to keep you trying.
Really nice talking to you again, Sarah. I really feel like reconnecting with you was sort of something that I needed and was supposed to happen. Because like I said, I've been going through this stuff myself for over the last 2 years. And so serendipitously, it's a real treat. If people want more information on surrogacy or fertility, they can contact Sara or others at fertilityconsultants.ca for blended family and step parent support, blendedfamilysupport.ca as well. Once again, it was very nice talking to you again, Sara.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
You can check me out on Instagram and TikTok at Scott_loves_puns. Puns is with a Z. You can also find me on YouTube, Scott Loves Puns _ASMR. And you can also purchase my audiobook and new comedy EP for only $2 and $1 at swoaudio.bandcamp.com. Thanks for listening and have a good night.